goes through the computer.
Okay, well, that sounds okay. Whatever you've done. Okay. Yeah, this is the other thing that people think about with the heritage sector. I've spent 20 years in the sector trying to mainstream how we are viewed, because there is a view that we sit out on the margins, and actually, of course, we're integral to Scotland's past and to its future. Some of this is actually self-perpetuating, and I've got nothing against Tweed, but it's a bit of a symbol of the issues that we face. Where we are at the minute, so just bear with me. This is a thing I did for our board to try and explain to them how things have evolved over the past century. So all things decay, and that's just how things are. And this is not a scientific illustration by any means. The changing climate since the 60s in Scotland is starting to have a noticeable and significant effect. The red line represents health and safety law, which you might think is quite random for a heritage person to be talking about, but it is actually really important. So 1974, the Health and Safety at Work Act kicks in, and then all the stuff that comes subsequent to that, that has increased significantly over time. The other thing that's happened, that green line unfortunately represents investment. So the investment that's gone into the historic environment and the assets that I look after has dipped over time. The actual rate of decay, therefore, is much, much higher, and where we find ourselves at the minute is in that bubble at the end, where the rate of decay has increased significantly over the past 20 to 30 years, and that is both exacerbated and caused by changes in our climate. So what kind of challenges do we face as a heritage sector in Scotland? Is it oversimplistic just to say it's about money? Money comes into it, but that's an oversimplification. We've seen an incredible drop in skills. This week I've been fighting really hard to stop there are 3 training providers of stonemasonry skills in Scotland. We're that much away from it being one. And for a country that's fundamentally built of stone and lime, that's a bit of a problem. So these are real challenges. We've seen a huge decline in expertise, particularly in local authorities over the past 20 years or so. That's becoming more and more of an issue. And probably as of last year as an organisation, we didn't have a problem recruiting generally. I've got huge problems at the minute trying to get the right skills. And it's partly about pay, but it's actually more because the skills aren't out there. Materials provision is a really difficult problem. Brexit hasn't helped that. Ongoing maintenance, the lack of ongoing maintenance across the historic environment is really starting to bite. We've got gaps in research. The relevance thing comes back to how others see us, and visitor pressure. I'll show you some images shortly, but that's a problem that probably we never really had before. And the difficulty is that climate change has exacerbated these things and has prompted us to have a number of crises much faster than perhaps we might have expected. So, very, very quick overview. Generally, impacts of climate change, Scotland. We'll see increasing temperatures across all the seasons, warmer, drier summers, milder winters, but significantly wetter, and in some locations, particularly the West Coast, if you think that's possible. We see sea levels rise. We will see reduced frost, which people often see in my world as a good thing, because that's quite often a primer of decay. But it doesn't mean it'll disappear entirely. It just means it'll be less frequent. And the key thing probably we are definitely seeing is variability in weather. On the right-hand side, this is how a building dies. And if you think about the 336 properties that we look after, About 2/3 of them are roofless ruins. So a building is designed to shed water with a roof, and many of our assets have no roofs, and we fight a constant battle to stop water getting into the wall heads and down the faces of the walls. And I'll show you what the consequences of that are shortly. We've done quite a lot of work in and around the assessment of risk. 89% of our properties in care are exposed to a climate-related risk or hazard in a way that's not acceptable. 28 sites, very high indeed. This is a real, tangible problem and difficulty for us. You won't be able to read the details on this chart, but this is basically projected sea level rise out to 2100. Jarlshof there, you'll see, is about 1.5 metres, and 1.5 metres at Jarlshof is a real issue for us. Fort George, we've done some modelling at Fort George, which shows inundation all over the place. And even sites like Blackness Castle, not far from here, the variability in the tidal range and the sea level rise is quite significant. So that's easy, we'll just build defences. Well, it doesn't kind of work like that. This is Skara Brae, one of the most important Neolithic sites in Europe, World Heritage Site, key attribute to the people of Orkney, and boy are they passionate about it, quite rightly. And if you know anything about Skara Brae, it was exposed in a series of winter storms, and we have been monitoring the coastal erosion here for quite a time, and it's actually frightening. The first time I went up to Skara Brae, when I took on responsibility of the estate, maybe 15 years ago, there was the remnants of a water mill just to the right of the guy doing the scanning there, and completely gone now. That wasn't that long ago. So we've had to get our heads around this very quickly, and we are working really hard to get on top of it. So what we've been doing with other public bodies like SNH is looking at things like coastal erosion and monitoring that over time. So it's interesting to me just now, there's quite a lot of discussion at the moment about an island deal for Orkney, and of course the focus is on economic development and tourism. And I have to stick my hand up occasionally and say, what about the site? Are we still going to have a site? When are we going to have that discussion? Are we going to build sea defences here, bearing in mind that that's going to push the problem somewhere else? Or are we going to retreat, or what are we going to do? So these are real discussions now, and people seem to still think that they're quite out and far away. And you'll appreciate that the costs of sea defences somewhere like here are fairly significant. But you can see up in the top left there's a rate of loss we're looking at 0.4 of a metre per year. It's quite a lot, but of course the coast is dynamic, so it lifts and lays all over the place, so things change over time, but we're clearly seeing a degradation. One of the consequences of these challenges is deterioration, and these are all things that were written last summer, most of them in reference to an interview I did for the Glasgow Herald, and I talked about the need for us to make some difficult decisions, and actually we can't look after everything we have. So we have a narrowing window of opportunity where we need to take some tough decisions, otherwise those decisions are going to be made for us. So if we don't prioritise what we're going to look after, we're essentially leaving the assets to their resilience to resist the forces of nature, if you like. And that was the reaction, okay? So it was the SNP's fault, Nicola Sturgeon's fault usually, and you know, we got a really hard time, which then causes panic, but it just symptomises to me where we are and the realities in our understanding and perception of actually where the world is at the minute. And how we look at things really needs to change. I have to be careful when I talk about this stuff, because tourism is important, no question about that, but not how we do it just now. And you won't see the figures here. This is stuff that I lifted off the Visit Scotland website last night, and it was an analytical report on the impacts of film tourism in Scotland. I thought that's going to be interesting. Not a thing about the negative impacts, all about volume. And for me, contentious, as long as we measure tourism benefit in volume, we're never going to get anywhere. It has to be about quality of experience. So is it a blessing? Well, I would argue that for some people in Orkney, it's seen as a bit of a curse. So the folks that are making the money in Orkney are the bus companies, hopefully some of the shopkeepers, but even us in terms of ticket prices and stuff, it's because it's discounted heavily, because that's the way the market works. That's a difficulty. We're also seeing lots of this, crazy American ladies trying to meet a hairy Highlander and get thrown back in time. And this is a bit of a shocker. This is Doon Castle, just up the road. I hadn't been at Doon for a couple of years, and I was appalled. So this is footpath erosion around the castle, to the point we had to close the footpaths. The local team had put aluminium sheets in the grass to try and cope with the buses. It was traffic, it was miserable. So I shut it all, got rid of the buses, and we've been working to reinstate the site. We're doing some good stuff at Doon, I think. But actually, this represents to me what Scotland's heritage assets and tourism is going to look like if we don't tackle it and are not proactive about it. So that's all quite depressing for a Saturday morning. So is all lost? Absolutely not. I genuinely think that the situation we're in just now, and the transition from a high carbon economy to a low carbon economy, presents huge challenges, from a climate change perspective, but huge opportunities for heritage sector. And I'm actually starting to even be worried about the word heritage, because it describes something that's in the past, and we'll come to that. We need to reposition ourselves as a sector. We need to take some pretty difficult decisions, but fundamentally we've got to move away from a kind of Victorian outlook on how we manage our assets. How we manage our assets as an organisation particularly goes back to the sort of Victorian museum approach, and we almost treat castles and structures in the landscape as if they were in a museum, and quite often it's quite dishonest, to be honest. Yeah, I could go on about that forever, but I won't. However, so flip it round the other way, and if I'm talking to a politician, this is what I'm telling them. Scotland are world leading in our work on climate change in relation to heritage. We've been miles ahead of other countries on heritage science, digital documentation, visualisation for quite a long time now. We're really good on the science and application of traditional materials and forms of construction, to the point that we are regularly asked to travel around the world and talk to other organisations about our approach. The thing that's flickering around on the right-hand side of the screen there is a virtual online collaboration tool. We took the technology from the Virgin Galactic space program, would you believe? And there's 5 of us in that room, one in Orkney, one in the Western Isles, me in Stirling, and a couple of colleagues in Edinburgh, and we're online walking around our sites, and we can lift the site and put it on a table, walk around it, we can measure it, we can discuss it, and all that stuff. That's transformational. It means we're not having to bring people to Edinburgh to have a discussion about things. We also have 5,000 years of knowledge and expertise on how to live sustainably, how to build with local materials, how to build in a low carbon way, and how to create things that are repairable rather than disposable. We know that traditional forms of construction are low carbon, they're passive, they're better for your environment, and I'll show you a good reason for that in a sec. Imagine also that if I said as a sector that, and I have shown this to politicians, we deliver 95% of Scottish Government objectives. I think there's a justice one or something that we don't feed into, but everything else that we do as a sector, but still people only see us as tourism. We don't see all the other stuff that goes with it. And this is why we're important. I don't know if, like me, you get these horrible things popping up on Facebook for plastic windows and here's a grant and da-da, and I'm waging a one-man war against these people. This is a problem, and this is a societal problem, and I get constantly, well, if we do things properly, it's more expensive. Design life of 25 years. UPVC is banned in quite a few countries, in enlightened countries, because of its toxicity and cancer-generating properties. I would not have young kids in a house with UPVC newly installed off gases for about 2 years. It's hideous stuff. And when it's done, you can't burn it, you can't recycle it, it goes to landfill. Timber's not like that. And if you look after it properly and you use decent timber, etc., etc. So these are all things that we know, but all of a sudden people are trying to grapple with them and building standards and the like, are like, oh, we have to do research on passive house, and we've been doing it for thousands of years. We also have some uncomfortable truths that we don't face up to. I walked past, when I came in from the car park earlier, a building that's clad in Chinese granite. Good chance that that Chinese granite has been pulled out of the ground by kids or people without adequate health and safety precautions. This is all fairly recent, but certainly the sandstone that you buy in Dobies for your paving stone, which is called Highlander sandstone, has come from Rajasthan in India, and definitely produced by kids. The realities of that, actually, is Scotland had 19,000 active building stone quarries and some of the best building stone on the planet. So that's a bit of a problem. I talked a bit about tourism today, and please don't think I'm anti-tourism, because I think actually tourism is critical to us. And in some respects, if you take the natural and built environment, it's the most sustainable asset Scotland has, if you sit it alongside our culture and our people. But we need to do it differently. It can't be about volume anymore. We need to really think about the impacts. And the stuff that's coming down the line in policy terms from government in and around carbon is really going to impact. So we've been asked to look at now how we manage and defray the carbon from tertiary influences that we have, and that includes tourism. At some point down the line, we're going to have to take responsibility for the carbon of the people that visit Edinburgh Castle. That would melt your head, but it's coming. I think I touched on this, and just a couple more slides, but I touched on this earlier. I think one of the difficulties is that inevitably heritage is seen as about something about the past, and I increasingly think that's a real problem for us, because it's not. Every day I see young people training in our centre in Stirling who are desperately enthusiastic for a career using traditional skills, and I think the traditional word is something that should perhaps supplant heritage in the long term, because quite often what we're doing is actually traditional, but it's not bound in the past. So what we need actually is an understanding and a perception of heritage or traditional, whatever you want to call it, that it's not just backward looking, that actually we take what we've learned from the past and apply it to the future. There's an awful lot of crumbling things in here. I must have been depressed that day. And the other thing, I thought I would just tie this back. I spoke to Richard earlier, and Richard and I were both at uni together here, doing environmental science a long time ago, and some of it stuck. So When we look at how we manage our assets, I'm really keen that we take a holistic view. And essentially it's a system, and it's a really dynamic system. We have a tendency to look at something in the landscape and just see it's there and it's stasis, and of course that doesn't happen. If you think about all the energy flows in and out of that system, the interaction of people, the influence of wildlife, biodiversity, the impacts of climate, it's a mass of stuff, which is no different to an environmental system. This is a woodlander, I guess, if you look at that from that perspective. So I think we have some huge challenges going forward. We're certainly under pressure, but it's by no means in a state of desperation yet. But I think there has to be a fundamental shift. Anyway, hope you find that interesting. Thank you.